You are listening to Smash the Bug. We have a special guest on here today, Chris Anderson. He's a tech lead at Born Group. Currently resides in California, and we're going to talk about some fascinating challenges that he has. Especially, we're going to talk about some RabbitMQ. When I heard those words that he listed in the show notes, it made me really excited because RabbitMQ is probably, if I was to throw out a number, it's probably the most underestimated or underutilized feature that Magento provides to boost performance on a website. And I look forward to seeing future versions of Magento hopefully leverage RabbitMQ more and more. But for us as developers, the tools are there, the capabilities are there. We have to be leveraging RabbitMQ as much as possible in every situation possible. But again, with that, there comes some challenges. And Chris has fought through some of those challenges, and he's going to bring us up to speed with some of his solutions and his methodologies to how he approached this. And that's why I'm really excited about this. So without further ado, welcome to the stage. Welcome to this podcast. It's great to have you here. Maybe you can just share a little bit about what you do at Born Group.
Yeah, so I'm a technical lead at Born Group. I interface with the client and develop solutions. On this particular project, I was kind of the tech lead and architect. Like I said, interface with the client to build an integration between, their financial reconciliation platform, as well as we did custom work with SSO as well. So I will talk to the client, put that in Jira tickets, create epics and stories, assist, developers as well. So
nice. At
a high level, what I do there.
Absolutely. And so you have the big picture, and especially like how this relates to the merchant. I think that can be one of the challenges that developers face, is that it's easy for us to get into a rabbit hole and to forget, like, okay, we're working. And I was just talking with somebody about this the other day. We work on our ticket, get it done, push it out the door, but there's often bigger, more context. And so you're that person with that more additional context, especially because you're working with a merchant, your clients, whoever it is, on a daily basis. So you have that context, and obviously you're the one who shares it with your developers. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Great. We try to have like one POC, and that's me to divvy up all the information amongst everybody else. Whereas the client on the other end, they might have many POCs, but that just depends on the
POC, meaning point of contact. Yeah, that's
exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I don't know about many points of contact on the client side. That could get a little hairy sometimes, but you're the guy to sort that out. That's good. So the question I always love to ask our guests, especially the technical guests, is what kinds of challenges have you been working through recently, as a tech lead? And I think we're going to have a conversation about RabbitMQ, right?
Yeah, exactly. The challenges are like more or less on my end is understanding what the client really wants and to put that in Magento terms in a very easy, manageable way. That way that we're not developing something custom that doesn't need to be custom, and we could use like Magento out of the box as much as possible. And that has to do with, if we're talking about performance in RabbitMQ. If we use Magento out of the box as much as possible, that will increase performance as well. So the more that you stay in line with, does this have to be custom or doesn't it? Those are really what I try to differentiate between the requests of the client and what I do throughout a project is make that very clear, because clients like to reach, and if you could bring them in and just be like, well, we're 90% there on a Magento out of the box way. Can we just change the business requirements so we could use Magento in the best way possible because of performance?
And that's so good, because I think it's easy for developers to get trigger happy. Oh yeah, let's build this new feature. And yet there's often, not all the time, but there's often something that can be leveraged out of the core. The idea at the bare minimum often, but there's stuff that you can extend as well. Exactly. And it's really good to have somebody like you, because otherwise, and I've heard so many stories of merchants, they leave agencies because they're like, wait, we paid $50,000 to build this feature out, and we just found out that this is already available in one way or another in this other part of Magento. And
exactly,
it's really good. It's really good. Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, a lot of people you have to understand all the features of Magento, like period, if you're going to be in somebody like a position I am. And if you don't, then you're going to have those cases where you talked about, like merchants leaving because they're frustrated and they, like you said, just spend a bunch of money for no reason.
Well, and the other thing is, I'm sure you have a lot of happy merchants that you work with because you're technical, and that's what I see over and over again. Merchants love to work with technical people, and because you have the answers, I'm sure, for a lot of questions right away, because you have invested in your career, you have invested in your knowledge of this, you have pushed your limits, you have jumped outside the box because you've made those investments. You are that solid, you are that great point of contact with those that you work with.
Yep, exactly.
All right, so Chris, you've talked about this integration that you built out that leveraged RabbitMQ. Maybe you can kind of walk us through the high-level overview as far as what this entailed in order to make this integration happen.
Yeah, so I think to start with, it would be beneficial talking about vaguely what the client's problem was.
Yes.
They were trying to basically onboard about 4 different websites on the Magento platform, and these websites were all over the place on it was like a Frankenstack, basically. So they had websites using this technology or this stack over there, blah, blah, blah. And they wanted to bring it all on Magento. So we were the agency that would provide, a solution for all the websites to be on Magento Commerce and communicate to 2 different systems, one being the financial reconciliation platform, the ERP, and then also they had an SSO that they wanted to integrate into Magento as well.
And when you say SSO, what are for our listeners, what would that be an acronym for?
Single sign-on.
Okay.
So, they have a central hub of user information and credentials. They wanted to be able to, on the Magento side of things, when you go to the login or register, it wouldn't actually use Magento. It would actually, go to the SSO platform, log in, then set a cookie, and then we would base all the information off of that cookie as far as registering and signing in. But anyway,
and this is for customers. This is on the front end, not necessarily the admin panel on the back end.
Exactly. Nothing to do with admin, just all front end customers.
Okay. Great. Okay. We're tracking. That's good.
Good. So the hard part was, the client was building on their end how to communicate with Magento at the same time that we were trying to figure out how to communicate to their systems. So we were kind of in like this middle area where, we're just going to propose a solution and we're just going to assume that we're going to hit a REST endpoint of some sort. So on our end, we're just going to utilize RabbitMQ to offload that process of sending order data to some sort of, REST API somewhere. We don't know yet.
Okay.
And then as time went along, we identified, problems that could potentially arise, which was, maybe the REST API was down or that service was down that they provided. So that's when, we thought RabbitMQ would be a perfect candidate for this because, if we initially send a request and the service is down for whatever reason, we could put it back on a queue and then we could continue to retry.
That's outstanding. Yeah.
Cool. So there was a queue made for each of the websites. And then I'm using the right terminology. There's an exchange queue. Yeah. So there's queues, and then there was 2 consumer classes that would be the retry consumer, and then there would be the dead letter consumer. So dead letter queue, and then the retry queue for each of the different websites. So if the service was down, then it would just get put back. You get a response of like 400 or 500, whatever error code. And then it would continue to retry on a given interval, which was configurable in Magento. So, retry every 30 seconds or retry every minute in the queue. And then you would have also a configurable value of how many times to retry, because, you could put 100 retries in there, but what's the point? If it's down, it's down. If it's like a 500 error, like something's malformed, for example, the content, and it's just not processing it right. So there's no point to keep trying. So that's what the dead letter queue is for. Then after the retry queue, it would go to the dead letter queue, and then an email would be sent or some other sort of business logic to provide our client that we're working with that, there was a failure with this order.
Yeah. Well, and I think
so that was a lot of information, but
yeah, but we'll break that down just a little bit, because one of the things I think one of the reasons why RabbitMQ is not as widely used as maybe it could be is because it seems too complex. Like what's an exchange, what's a queue, what's a consumer, like some of that stuff, and ultimately I think as we break these concepts down a little bit, and I don't think that's for this podcast here. There's a lot of material available online about that. People will find, our listeners will find that those concepts really aren't that difficult to understand. In fact, they make a lot of sense, and I think you have an absolute brilliant application for this, because as in a case in point, we recently worked on a project where it was using, I won't say the name of the vendor, but a module that connected with a third-party ERP, like the accounting system software. And literally at the, you have an event in our notes here, the service quote submit success event. I think that's literally the event it was using. It sent a REST, it sent a trigger an API request, obviously using the REST protocol or REST structure to this ERP. And like you were saying, if there's a 500 error or some type of error with this communication, it literally took down the entire checkout process.
Exactly.
It blew my mind. And yet RabbitMQ is a perfect solution for this. And not only did you guys just use RabbitMQ at a basic level, you then have those queues, which I love, for being able to retry it however many times, and then it's not just retried for 100 times like you said, because ultimately you could take the system down if you have a real problem like but then it goes into another queue, queue for final processing if it's just something is totally out. So that is really cool to hear. Yeah.
It was well engineered, and there's a bunch of minds on this. It wasn't just me alone. I worked with, a couple architects on the client side. This was a big company, so they had a technical team as well. So every solution was pretty well thought out. The initial design, like I thought of, because that's my job, obviously, right. But it got tweaked a little bit as time went on. But it worked out pretty well. It was an interesting problem because not only we had the RabbitMQ on the Adobe Commerce side, but we also had the their end, they were using Kafka too. So it was a fun project because it took me outside of my comfort zone, and I needed to learn a bunch of different terminology and just different ways that things are being done with different systems. So it was cool.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we hear the term microservices thrown around a lot. Like it's, it's a really, Adobe's, working to build out microservices for search, and, well, obviously they have one for product recommendations, that sort of thing. Would you say that the way you engineered this with RabbitMQ kind of being the broker between your transmission area, there's probably a better name for it, basically what sends the orders into the ERP, and how that is separated from Magento, would you kind of look at that as the microservice or like a practical example of that, or would you say it falls into a different category?
Yeah, I would agree with that, because the way that RabbitMQ is implemented, it's very decoupled from Magento's system. So it's kind of in its own area. And that's why I believe, like when we talk about, the bug that I encountered, I think it was behaving in a different way, in a non-Magento way. So it's, long story short, it's just very decoupled. And I would say it has microservice behavior for sure.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So what's that challenge? You said there was kind of a major problem that you ran into in your
it wasn't
solution here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So the problem was, sorry, my notes are over here. So if I'm looking over here, just to remind myself, Yeah. So it wasn't so much of like a hard problem. It was the environment that we were working in because with the ERP, Microsoft Dynamics, they only had one instance of it, and they were onboarding, this one website to use Microsoft Dynamics for the first time. So this was on a live environment, and the way that RabbitMQ, yeah, exactly. The way RabbitMQ was behaving, it was, for lack of a better word, pissing everybody off because it was spamming, these new orders over and over again that weren't working. And so we had to kind of stop that and then put a bunch of logging around what was going on. I came up with the idea that we should have a min grid kind of tracing what the messages are doing. So if you were to go, log into an administrator, we created an min grid. So there was a trace of the order, and then you click on the order, then you could see what the messages were doing. How many times were they in the retry queue, or did they go to the dead letter queue? And for each of those different retries, we would get all the information within the message itself. So you could see how the data is changing. That's especially valuable because there was, for lack of memory here, I think there was 4 or 5 different properties to the message itself, and 2 of them being the configurable values, like, how many times you want to retry based off of what was configured in Magento. So our thing was 3. And then on an interval, what was like the timeout? So try every 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever. So what was going on, it was failing in the retry area as we did the min grid, and then some properties weren't being persisted correctly through the messages. What ended up happening is, I guess PHP Storm wasn't fully indexing for me for whatever reason, and there was just simply a variable misspelled that wasn't being picked up by PHP Storm or throwing any sort of exception. It was just not putting the correct value in the message itself. So it was getting stuck in the retry queue and then just sending that order over and over again. So these messages would just be stuck in there. How we figured that out was, do the min grid and then just more logging. And it took actually another developer that was using VS Code to see that it was simply just a variable misspelt. And then sure enough, that fixed it.
That's crazy. One variable missed. And those are the most maddening of all things. I get it if something's completely missed or there is some idea that was just, built wrong or something like that. But to have one variable with that's misspelled, that can be kind of maddening or very exciting once you find that out, because that's like a needle. Exactly. That's a literal needle in a haystack then.
It was definitely a champagne moment because the financial reconciliation people were mad at us. The tensions were high. It was sort of the end of the project. We've been doing all this QA over and over again, especially for this integration and the SSO integration.
Yep.
And we just wanted the timelines were getting really crunched. Everybody wanted this to get done, and it was a good feeling. However, it was good because the min grid kind of turned into something for them just to, for checking how the messages are working. If something fails, we also implemented a button in that area too. So if it failed for whatever reason, you could just click a retry button in the min grid and it would just send off. So say the service was down, the REST API service, then we could just retry it manually if it failed. So that was a cool thing that came out with it. So in a very agile fashion, we kind of developed feature sets over time to really make it what it is.
That's well put, Chris, because I just had a somewhat similar situation, and it was interesting for me. The solution was actually as a result of building this grid. We had a kind of a queue that I funnel messages to RabbitMQ, and then which then actually process in the back end. But I didn't want to clog RabbitMQ up. Maybe I should. Maybe that was just my ignorance there. But regardless, this queue, I had built it out so it was designed to be unique rows in there, and then once that row was processed, we would clean that row out, and then a new row would be added in for, if that product, for example, needs to be re-indexed in this pricing indexer. What I found, though, is as over the course of time, I had added extra columns in there. I had added a created at, I added a indexed at, I had a sent at, a couple of these, and some error logging columns in there for other reasons. But what I missed was I did not come back and I did not add an extra filter in there. So basically, these products were not being re-indexed, and it was only through that visualization I was like, why is this product only listed once in here? I could swear that it should have been listed multiple times. And it was through that visualization. So logging, visualization of those logs, like you say, is incredibly valuable. So yeah, that's fantastic. It's a fantastic suggestion. So what are your takeaways from this challenge as you had to fight through it?
Well, I think it was just good. I mean, this was my first project when I was got hired on a Born Group, so it was a lot to not only figure out new solutions, but also just you're with a new company and figuring all that out too. But it gave me a chance to really understand RabbitMQ when I really didn't know anything about it. And my takeaways were having a pretty deep knowledge of how RabbitMQ works, and now. At Born Group, I'm kind of like the RabbitMQ guy, and then
Nice.
ERP integration guy, because this was, a bigger project when it came to utilizing that. So, just getting in there with Xdebug, learning how to use Xdebug with the messages, which is interesting, because you use the CLI to list the consumers. Then you just do a bunch of operations that will, create messages in the queue without processing them. And then once you have those messages in the queue, you could set a breakpoint within the consuming class, and then start the consumer, and then you could just, kind of just see how everything's going along, and it's really cool. So as far as debugging, which I think is super important with Xdebug and understanding those things, that's what I really took away from this project for sure. Outside of architecting a solution for, an ERP integration and stuff like that.
That's great. Those are good, solid takeaways. Thank you. That's good. My final question I always like to ask, but it's a bit of a long-winded question, or a long answered question, is what are you doing to grow in your career? Sharpen your skills to become truly that excellent developer. And I've loved the conversation we've had. You've definitely very much been on that road. But what can you share with our audience, those who are listening to this, as far as things that have been meaningful, helpful to you to get to this place of great knowledge, that go-to person in the company? I think that's probably something almost every developer desires at one level or another, to be that go-to.
Sure.
Other than obviously this really interesting project that you worked on, what would you say some of those things that you personally are doing to get to this place?
Yeah, so before Born Group, I came from a background of just using open source. So there's a lot of stuff that I've never used before or understood, Magento is a huge system. So to really go in and make sure you understand all the features and functionality of Magento, first and foremost, is huge in any developer's career. You could go down the certifications and, be a backend developer or a front end developer. But if you don't know the solution specialist, which I'm studying for right now,
nice.
But if you don't know all of that information, it's going to kind of make you weaker in a developer in the Magento space. So it's really important that you take your time and understand, commerce, open source, all the different features and functionalities as much as you can. But if you could go probably in your Magento career without ever using some sort of features within Magento. But it only takes that one time for a client to be like, well, I want this customization. You're like, okay, it's going to take 100 hours, but it already exists in Magento. You just wasted a bunch of time. So And furthermore on that topic, when you understand like the back end of how things work from the administration, it's easier to develop because you understand the full scope of what you're doing. So that's one point that's I think is really important. And the other bigger one, look at these, would be if you don't understand something within the code base or understand how it's working in Magento in general, the code's there. Yeah. So you could set a breakpoint within, Magento. Okay, it's breaking there, this controller action, and then just kind of follow it through, see how it's being built with anything really. So it's important just to take your time. Don't get, frustrated and just look through the code and, try to figure it out. And there's so much information online as well that you can make those correlations and learn.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, and just be goal oriented, and then just set goals that are easy to manage.
Right.
Don't overwhelm yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, that is good suggestions. I think, I don't know why, but it's easy to be in like in Magento, Adobe Commerce all day, every day, and it's easy to miss. Like it was a year or two ago. I've been working in it for roughly 10 years, and like a year or two ago, I came across the search configuration in the marketing tab, where you can redirect customers based off their search query to different pages. And like, is that something you'd use all the time? Probably not, but there are definitely some merchants in some cases that will find that helpful. And yeah, I mean, just learning the software that one's working on it's an outstanding point, and I don't think it's talked about enough, just because of how critical it is.
Sure. There was like another bug briefly I'll talk about. It was just learning how to, the sorting wasn't work on the PLP page. So we were trying to figure out what was going on. This is a heavily customized site. I was using Elasticsearch. So my boss suggested, why don't you just go in the Elasticsearch module, see what's getting returned, and just kind of understand how Elasticsearch is working in conjunction with Magento. Right. So it turns out that, all Elasticsearch is doing is returning the results in a very quick way, but it's not doing any sort of sorting, or it's not sorting by price or sorting by color. That's all done on the Magento side. So it was interesting to like understand what was going on there from an Elasticsearch standpoint. And then set a breakpoint, you kind of see the collection. Okay, it's coming, but it's not sorting the way it's presented on the Magento side of things. So like something else is going on, and it turns out it was just some little error. But I thought initially Elasticsearch was doing the sorting by price or color, the product attributes, but it's not doing any of that. So that was cool to learn too. So you just need to like step through and just look through the code, and you'll get there slowly but surely.
Excellent. That's good. Chris, this has been really good. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you said there's a Chelsea game, and yet you're still willing to share your knowledge with the community, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate it very much. And it's been some really good conversation and suggestions that I know we all can learn from. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience here with the community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Well, it was an absolute pleasure having Chris on the show. I think the whole concept of RabbitMQ, again, I want to reiterate, it seems scary, it seems big, but you can get into it at a very basic level and realize those benefits at a very, I'm going to say a fairly easy level. And so take some time here this next week to dig in and understand RabbitMQ, to just even read one article about it. You might start seeing some applications for this tool, and I think you're going to find it very beneficial. So speaking of finding things beneficial, if you found this show today to be beneficial, please take a couple minutes. It would be a tremendous honor to have a 5-star review written about this show. And don't forget to subscribe to the show here on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. We're bringing you hopefully the very, very best information from the e-commerce development community as far as how you can become a great e-commerce developer. We'll talk to you next time.